Welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at the Bible. And specifically, we're going to be kind of focusing on the Gospel of John. For anyone out there who's maybe a little intimidated by the Bible, just where to even begin.
Yeah,
This is a great place to start.
absolutely.
So we're going to be looking at a conversation that Jesus has with a man named Nicodemus. To set the stage a little bit, who is this Nicodemus guy?
Well, he was a Pharisee, so that means he was a member of the Jewish ruling council, so kind of like the religious leaders of the time. And they were known for being really strict about following Jewish law.
So the fact that he seeks Jesus out and even calls him like a teacher come from God,
Yeah,
that's kind of a big deal, right?
that's huge. I mean, he recognizes that Jesus is, breaking from some of the traditional religious norms, but is still intrigued by him, drawn to him.
And there's this detail that always kind of gets me. It says that Nicodemus comes to Jesus at night.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think about that?
Well, there could be a couple things going on there. Um, maybe he's a little afraid of what other people will think if they see him talking to Jesus, given his position. Or maybe he wants to have a private conversation away from all the scrutiny of the religious establishments.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, either way, it makes for a really an interesting conversation
Yes.
because Jesus really gets to the heart of the matter right away. And he tells Nicodemus, very truly, I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God unless they are born again.
And you can imagine if you're Nicodemus, you're hearing that for the first time. That's a pretty startling statement.
Yeah. And so Nicodemus, he's a very literal person. And so he takes Jesus' words literally and he says, wait, how can someone be physically born again? Can I go back into my mother's womb?
Right. Like he wants a physical explanation for something that is deeply spiritual.
So how does Jesus clarify what he means by being born again?
Well, he uses the analogy of wind. He says, the wind blows wherever it pleases. You hear its sound, but you cannot tell where it comes from or where it is going. So it is with everyone born of the Spirit. So if you think about that for a minute, you can't see the wind itself, but you can feel its power. You can see the effects of it.
It's this invisible force that's all around us, shaping and changing things.
Exactly. And that's kind of how the Spirit works in a person's life. It's not something you can necessarily see or touch, but you can experience its transforming power. That feeling deep down that something has shifted, that you're seeing the world in a new light.
It's like a breath of fresh air, for your soul.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's about a renewal, a fresh perspective, a new way of living that's kind of guided by something bigger than yourself.
So it's not about going back in time and literally being born again. It's about this internal transformation.
Yes, precisely. And that's why Jesus tells Nicodemus that he needs to be born of water and the Spirit. Water is often used in the Bible as a symbol of cleansing, washing away the old, making way for the new.
So it's like being cleansed from the inside out.
Exactly. And then the Spirit represents that new life, that connection to God that kind of guides you and empowers you to live differently.
So, I mean, for someone who is just starting to explore the Bible, this idea of being born again, it can be kind of confusing.
Oh, yeah.
But what Jesus is really talking about is this profound shift that can happen within us when we open ourselves up to something beyond just our physical world.
It's about recognizing there's more to life than what we can just see and touch, connecting to something greater than ourselves, some source of love and purpose that can kind of transform us from the inside out.
So we've been talking about this idea of being born again, this spiritual transformation, that Jesus is describing. But how does that actually happen? What does that even look like in real life?
Well, later in the conversation, Jesus uses this really powerful image to kind of illustrate this. He talks about Moses lifting up the bronze snake in the wilderness.
Okay. That seems a little random. What does that have to do with being born again?
Yeah, it might seem that way at first, but it's actually a really profound foreshadowing of Jesus's own crucifixion. So remember, the Israelites were dying from snake bites, and God told Moses to make this bronze snake and put it on a pole, and anyone who looked at it would be healed.
Okay, yeah, I vaguely remember that story.
Yeah.
But how does that connect to Jesus?
Well, just as the Israelites had to look to that bronze snake for physical healing, we have to look to Jesus for spiritual healing, for salvation. So it's a really powerful image of how we're saved from the consequences of our sin, not through our own efforts, but through faith in Jesus's sacrifice.
So it's not about trying to be good enough or earning our way into heaven. It's about recognizing our need for something outside of ourselves to save us.
Exactly. And this idea of Jesus being lifted up it has like a double meaning. It refers to his crucifixion, but also to his exaltation, his ascension into heaven. So just as that snake was raised up on a pole, Jesus was raised up on the cross, and ultimately he was raised up to the right hand of God.
Hmm. There's this like paradox of humility and glory, suffering and victory, all wrapped up in this one image.
It is. And it's a powerful reminder that even in our darkest moments, there's hope for redemption and new life. Now, after this conversation with Nicodemus, the Gospel of John kind of shifts focus to John the Baptist. You might remember him. You know, the guy who was baptizing people in the Jordan River.
Right. Yeah, he was this like wild, charismatic figure,
Yeah.
preaching out in the wilderness. And a lot of people thought that he was the Messiah. So why does he kind of like fade into the background when Jesus arrives on the scene?
Well, because John understood his role. He was the forerunner, the one preparing the way for the true Messiah. He even says, "He must increase, but I must decrease."
Wow. That's incredible humility. He's basically saying, it's not about me, it's all about Jesus.
Exactly. And he uses this beautiful analogy of a bridegroom and his friend. So the bridegroom is Jesus, and John is the friend who rejoices at the bridegroom's arrival. So he's happy to step aside and let Jesus take center stage because he knows that Jesus is the one who truly fulfills God's promises.
So John was like the opening act, getting the crowd warmed up for the main event.
Exactly. And even though John had this, large following, he never let his ego get in the way of pointing people to Jesus. And I think that's a powerful lesson for us too. It's not about our own glory or recognition. It's about pointing others to the source of true light and life.
It's about recognizing that there's something bigger than ourselves, something that can transform us and give us a new perspective on the world.
Absolutely. And that's what I think is so fascinating about the Bible. It's full of these stories and these characters that even though they lived thousands of years ago, they still speak to us today. They remind us that we're not alone in our struggles and our doubts and our search for meaning.
We've been diving deep, into the Gospel of John, exploring this story of Nicodemus and his encounter with Jesus. And it's a story that raises, a lot of questions about faith and spiritual transformation and what it really means to connect to something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, and I think as we kind of wrap up here, it's important to think about how this ancient text speaks to us today, especially if you're new to the Bible, or maybe you're feeling a bit skeptical about faith in general.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because, sometimes reading the Bible, it can feel a bit like you're stepping into a foreign country where you don't speak the language.
Right.
Yeah.
It is a vast and complex book, and it's easy to get lost in all the details
Yeah.
or, be overwhelmed by just the sheer amount of information.
Yeah, but what I love about the story of Nicodemus is that it shows us that it's okay to have questions, to even have doubts.
Right.
He was this respected religious leader, a scholar of the law, and yet he's still grappling with, what Jesus is teaching.
Yeah, he comes to Jesus in the dark of night, maybe afraid of what people will think, maybe even afraid of his own questions.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. Maybe you've been hurt by religion in the past, or maybe you're just not sure what you believe. And it's okay to feel hesitant, to, approach faith cautiously.
Absolutely. But what's so beautiful about Jesus' message is that it's an invitation, not a demand. He doesn't force himself on anyone. He simply offers, a path to a new way of living, a way of connecting to something deeper, more meaningful.
And choosing to follow that path isn't about blindly accepting everything that you hear. It's about engaging with the text, wrestling with these ideas,
Yeah.
and allowing yourself to be, challenged and transformed by what you discover.
It's about finding a truth that resonates deep within your own soul, a truth that brings hope and purpose to your life.
And that journey often starts with asking questions, just like Nicodemus did.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this and you're feeling, a little bit lost or unsure about where to start with the Bible, remember this. You're not alone. There are countless others who have walked this path before you, and they found incredible wisdom and guidance, in these ancient words.
And who knows, you might just discover that the Bible has something to say to you, something that speaks directly to your heart and helps you make sense of this crazy, beautiful, and often confusing journey we call life.
And hey, if you enjoyed this deep dive into the Gospel of John, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future explorations. Hit that notification bell so you'll be alerted every time we release a new video. And be sure to check out the video popping up on your screen now for another fascinating deep dive you won't want to miss. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.